Today's webinar. It's on digital citizenship. Look, we've had many requests about having a webinar on this topic, so here it is. And it's pretty timely because next week, I don't know if you know, but it's not C Week, it's not Science Week, it's actually Stay Smart Online Week. So that's from October the 9th to the 13th. So we've timed our webinar to coincide with that. And also, I don't know if you've got our newsletter for this week or this month. It was basically on digital citizenship. So if you haven't got that, we've got that as part of our host of resources on our handout today. So today's webinar, we're going to have plenty of practical activities for you to sort of delve into. And our presenter, Matt, who's done a lot of work for us, Matt Vines, he's what's called a education improvement leader in Victoria. So we'll find more about what Matt's doing. But he's worked on our Digital Technologies Hub as a writer, reviewed a lot of our resources, or done a lot of presentations. And I found him a really innovative teacher, and that's why he's going to do some talking today about his experiences with digital citizenship. Today, Matt's going to sort of share, allow you to share some ideas about your ideas about digital citizenship and some of the activities. And he's going to use a tool called Padlet. So that's the links are in the handout, which you've got in your, if you look onto your control panel. There's one of 5 handouts. If you can download that, that's got all the links. Also, Michelle, my colleague, will put some of those links into the chat at the right time, so you can use that. So we really want to get some engagement and get some ideas from you guys, and we'll share. You know, the more ideas we have, the better. And Matt will talk through some of his ideas, and you know, should be a really good webinar. So, but if you've got any other questions as they come up or arise, you can use the questions facility on the control panel. But I think it's about time we introduce Matt, and basically I might hand over to you, Matt, and we get started on our webinar.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming tonight. Really appreciate you giving up your time to come down. As Martin just said, I'm an education improvement leader down in Victoria, so I work with schools around curriculum, particularly around the digital technologies curriculum. And part of what we're looking to get out of tonight is for you guys to become a little bit more familiar with the digital citizenship side of the Australian curriculum, to look at some practical and engaging ways to teach digital citizenship in the classroom, and to know what relevant keywords to use to refine your searches on the Digital Technologies Hub and to locate relevant resources. So a really big emphasis tonight is around that practical side of implementing digital citizenship within the digital technologies curriculum. So the structure of the workshop tonight is to first look at what digital citizenship actually is, why it's important, so why do we actually want to teach it, and then where does the digital citizenship side of teaching the digital technologies curriculum sit within the curriculum as a whole. Then we want to look at how we can teach digital citizenship, so really focusing on some of those practical lessons, and then where you can find some further resources to support you in your implementation of the curriculum. So I guess in the spirit of making sure that everything around this is as practical as we can, we really want to have a look at some of the tools that you can use to support you as well in your own classroom. So there's a link that should be in the chat, and it's in your handout, to a Poll Everywhere. Now, if you haven't used this before, Poll Everywhere is a free, really accessible, really easy way to basically survey people and to get some information back. Now, this particular Poll Everywhere will create a word cloud. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to go to that link, and then in 1 or 2 words, I want you to just throw in what you think digital citizenship is, or what it means to you. What's the core of it? Is it around safety? What is it? And as that happens, what we will actually see over here, you'll see this is what Poll Everywhere looks like on our side. And as you reply to this, as you put in any words, it'll actually build a word cloud, or a Wordle, if you've ever used one of those before. So it's a really great tool to use in your classroom to build up a quick bit of understanding around a certain topic for brainstorming, so on and so forth. Because as people put in any input around it, it will build a graphic live. So I'm going to come back to this once people have actually had a chance to put in some words and ideas, because we will see it appear here. I'm just seeing. So give it a shot, throw in some words, and we'll see what comes out. As that happens, I'm going to just continue going through what's over here. So the Australian curriculum definition of digital citizen. Yes?
Yep. I've just gone into it to put in my ideas, and it says, welcome to Matt's presentation. As soon as he displays a poll, so I'm not sure if it's open yet.
It should be live. Let's just click, give it a shot now.
Yep, that's good. Now I can do it.
Okay, sorry about that.
All right.
There we go. See how it starts to populate as anyone throws in some words. That's a great way for us. So already we can see that people are thinking this is about responsibility. Now, the larger words, as with any word cloud, are the ones that are coming up a lot more often. So online responsibility, conscious citizenship, collaboration, online behaviour. So we're looking a lot at how we interact with other people in an online space, and particularly with an emphasis on safety and responsibility. So as I said, really great tool to use with your kids. Really good way to start off a unit or a lesson, start getting those ideas. I'm seeing some global positivity and globality in there. Really interesting. We might come back to that in a moment as it continues to populate. So the Australian curriculum definition of digital citizenship is an acceptance and upholding of the norms of appropriate, responsible behaviour with regard to the use of digital technologies. This involves using digital technologies effectively and not misusing them to disadvantage others. Digital citizenship includes appropriate online etiquette, literacy in how digital technologies work and how to use them, an understanding of ethics and related law, knowing how to stay safe online, and advice on related health and safety issues such as predators and the permanence of data. A digital citizen refers to a person who has the knowledge and effectively uses digital technologies to communicate with others, participates in society, and creates and consumes digital content. Digital citizenship is about confident and positive engagement with digital technologies. By educating students about digital citizenship, they will have the opportunity to develop an understanding about the following concepts: digital and information literacy, internet safety, privacy and security, cyberbullying, relationships, etiquette and communication, creative credit and copyright, and digital footprint. So this is an enormous amount of, enormous area of the curriculum to cover. There's a lot in it. So what we need to do is really break down those integral parts to this curriculum and really look at what our focal points are, what's important to this. So one of the starting points for that is to look at why we're teaching it, why the digital citizenship side of the digital technologies curriculum is important. So first of all, one of the main things that we know that's an important thing that we have to engage with students around is the changing workforce. So the FYA released a report in 2017 looking at the skills that would be expected from students moving into 2030. And almost 100% more time is going to be spent at work solving problems. They're going to be spending more time communicating, interacting in online spaces, and using a lot of problem solving and critical thinking in collaborating. And they're going to have to work a lot more independently. We know the workforce is changing immensely, and a lot of the work we can expect our students to be doing is going to be happening in a digital world. So we need to teach them to be competent and confident digital citizens. Furthermore, there are safety and legal implications to all the way students interact with the world these days. I'm just going to play this clip. Hopefully it's going to work on your end. Now, it's just stalled, but I don't need to continue to go through that. We've all seen that clip at some point or another. We've probably all really been annoyed by it when we see at the start of every movie that we used to get from Blockbuster, back when we got movies from Blockbuster. Now, the important thing around this movie, and the reason why I think it highlights the legal implications of digital citizenship, is that it never really worked for us. There's a saying out there that, sure, I wouldn't steal a car, but if I could down one, I sure would. And the important thing is that we really need to teach students in a way that makes them understand the legal implications of digital citizenship without them just feeling like we're giving them more rules. We also are facing an age where we have incredibly unrealistic expectations about our lifestyles and what we can expect from our own lives, what happiness really is. And we see this so prevalent in social media. I think this image highlights it perfectly around that idea of we put up a perfect lifestyle on social media all the time. We constantly are taking photos, we are constantly putting out an image that is not actually the reality, which for us, most of our generation grew up with that transition to social media. It didn't really exist when we were kids. So sometimes it takes a moment for us to really reflect and realize that we didn't have a developmental issue around these unrealistic expectations. We didn't grow up around them, which means that our version of unrealistic expectations that we had growing up was general advertising. It wasn't embedded in our friendship circles. We didn't look onto the internet every day and see a lifestyle that is beyond what we could regularly expect. And that can be really damaging. So we need to actually make sure students understand what is reality and the difference between social media and what they see in day-to-day society. And this ties incredibly into a more recent obsession with image and the idea that we need to always be putting out a very perfect version of ourselves. And quite often you'll see it where someone will be at home and they will put out something about a fantastic dinner they just had, even though they're sitting at home the whole time. Furthermore, with the change in society, we're also seeing relationships change. We're seeing the whole way that we interact with other humans change in a very large way. Back in the day, very different to Tinder and the way that we actually interact online. And this also then ties into safety, which I think this sums it up perfectly, that in 1998, we were telling students, don't get in strangers' cars, don't meet people from the internet, and now we literally summon strangers from the internet to get in their car. Uber is a fantastic invention. Same with Uber Eats and all these other great advances in, I guess, technology that we're facing in 21st century. However, they do have their own inherent risks and safety issues around them. And furthermore, this one's probably one of the biggest ones, which is the implications of anonymity. Anonymity more and more is ceasing to exist in our digital age. We're not truly anonymous. We can always be found, even if we have a fake name, we have a fake profile picture. And that's got some really important implications to the way we conduct ourselves online and the way that we behave. And it's a really important thing for students and young adults to understand, because for many of them, they don't realize that, and that they can hide behind a different picture or a different name and behave in any way without repercussions is a really common perception out there. And we need to challenge that perception and support them in understanding that online spaces have their own etiquette that we need to follow, and we need to interact in a responsible and respectful way in digital spaces. So, what is the digital technologies curriculum? This is one of the biggest changes that came along with the change in the Australian curriculum. It's a new learning area. So the digital technologies curriculum is not just ICT rebranded, which is a common misconception that's out there. The easiest way to view the digital technologies curriculum versus the ICT curriculum is that ICT is using technology, while digital technologies is understanding technology. Or another way to think about that is the difference between creation and consumption. ICT, we are consuming technology. We use it. We're using a PowerPoint, or I'm using a webcam right now. Creation, the digital technologies curriculum, on the other hand, is when we solve problems, we interact with other people, we make something. So easiest way to remember it, difference between ICT, using technology, digital technologies, understanding technology. So the structure of the digital technologies curriculum within the Australian curriculum, it has three real strands: digital systems, representations of data, and processes and production skills, all underpinned by creating digital solutions. Now, the digital citizenship side of the digital technologies really sits heavily in that creating digital solutions space. It's around interacting with other people and actually creating solutions to problems. So to simplify all that as best we can, we've put together this little graphic that really has the three main components of what constitutes a digital citizen. Their digital footprint and understanding what that is, having respectful online behavior, and being safe in a digital space. So digital safety, digital footprint, and respectful online behavior are the three parts that make the whole of digital citizenship. And we're going to go through each of those parts now, and we're going to look at some practical ways to engage with that in the classroom. In a moment, sorry. So within the strands of the Australian curriculum as well, within the digital technologies curriculum, we can see down here, the digital citizenship side of the curriculum sits mostly down this bottom end under evaluating and collaborating and managing. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is to have a look at some of the content descriptors where we can find the digital citizenship sitting. So under evaluating, we can see that we're looking at how people safely use common information systems, how they use communication systems to meet different needs on different levels. And this theme of evaluating spreads from foundation right up to 9 and 10. The whole way through having a very constant theme of that safety, making choices, and coming up with solutions, with taking into account risk and sustainability. So this is that digital safety side of that trifecta, with a fair bit of the digital footprint embedded in there too. On the other side, the collaborating and managing, this is really about project management. This is about working together to create solutions. This is around basically applying agreed ethical, social, and technical protocols. So actually working together in a space with an agreement around how to behave. All of this actually ties into the personal and social capability side of the curriculum as well, which I think it's important to actually mention the links to the other areas of the curriculum, because it doesn't stand alone. The curriculum is very integrated and tied in. And the personal and social capability side of the curriculum has a lot to do with self-management. It's really about how we behave, it's how we self-monitor, how we work with other people. It's all that social side of things. And so really, personal social capability, digital citizenship, together they really form global citizenship, because a lot of global citizenship is about having an awareness of the wider world and interacting with it, which is exactly what we do through a lot of digital media and digital citizenship. So now I'm going to start talking about the digital footprint side of the trifecta and really looking at some ways that we can engage with that. Now, before I start to talk about some lessons, I want to try an interactive activity here where we have a Padlet set up, which is that first link that's in the chat, and it should be in your handout as well. Now, a Padlet, if you haven't used it before, is simply an online space. It's like a canvas that has various sticky notes on it, or basically you can double click anywhere in that space and you can write something and you can contribute. You don't have to sign up. It's something that's completely anonymous and free. So under the category of the digital footprint, we're really looking at topics such as copyright and data ownership, digital footprints, digital identity, and verification of online information. So it's that idea of the permanency of our impact in an online space. It's about having an identity within an online space. It's about knowing who owns what and not infringing on legal ramifications in an online space. And it's about actually being able to find accurate information online, which is a really important thing in today's age. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is go to that link and you will see something that looks like this. Now, when you go to a Padlet, as I said, it's a bit of an online space where you can just add and move things around. So right now, I've got this particular little comment here that I can drag around, and all I need to do is double click and I can add something. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is, as I'm talking, I would like you to just add anywhere on here any lesson or a resource that you've used to teach digital footprints, sorry, because we're on this one, digital footprints in your classroom. Is there any way that you've actually gone about this before? And as I talk, we can see more things popping up, and it's a way for us to collaborate and share information and ideas. Fakebook is a fantastic resource if you haven't seen it before. It's basically a version of Facebook that you can use with students that is safe and designed to really cover social media with them. So I'm going to flip to this Padlet again once we get to the end of these slides that I'm going through. But please add as much as you can, and we'll talk through what we see popping up. Really great way to get your students to collaborate. So, oh, wrong one. So one activity that I've used in the classroom myself is a photo rip-up activity. So and all these activities, by the way, are designed to be scaled. So they're designed to be usable from various different year levels, depending on how you go about implementing them in the classroom. So this photo rip-up activity is really around the idea of emphasizing the permanency of information online, and how when we share something in an online space, we don't necessarily have ownership of it anymore, and it can be nearly impossible to actually get that resource or that photo or that whatever it is that was shared, to get that back, to remove it from their space. So the way I've run this activity in the past is to enter the lesson with photos, A4 photos of all my students printed out and ready to go. And then I've explained to the students, okay, first thing I want you to do, rip it in half. And as you can imagine, they love that bit of chaos. They rip their photo in half, and then we explain that the next step is that they have to get as many different pieces of other people's photos as they can. The way they do this is that they rip it in half, and then they give another piece to someone else and take one of their pieces. They can only take a piece of photo if they've given one away themselves. And then I put up a timer. It would be depending on your class and your context, but say give them 3 minutes and let them run crazy, trading photos left, right, and center, trying to get as many as they can. Then the moment it seems like that's getting a bit slow, I stop and we bring them all back together. And right at this stage, they've all got basically handfuls of different bits of different photos, different bits of scrap paper. Now I stop them and I explain, okay, now you have 30 seconds or a minute, however long, once again, this is depending on your context in the field, to get your photo back. You'll hear a massive groan, and then they'll run off and they'll try frantically to get all the pieces of their photo back. Before they can, once again, stop them, and then I get them to glue in those pieces of their photo into the book, and we have a big discussion around how difficult that was and what's going on. That's when we really start to talk about how when you share a photo online, in order to see a photo online, it gets downloaded to your computer. So each time someone views your photo, they get a copy of that photo too. So just because you want it back, you delete it, you would actually have to go around to each one of those individual computers and pull it back off them. And even in a small room such as that, with everyone in front of you, that's nearly impossible to achieve. When you're looking at a global scale, it is impossible. And then from there, we look at we turn it into a bit of a numeracy lesson, and we start looking at exponential growth. And we discuss how if I was to share my photo with 2 people, and then they were to share it with 2 each, and then them with 2 each, what would that look like? Can we graph that on a line? What equation would that look like? And we start looking at powers of, and we figure that out. And it's a really meaningful way for the students to get an internalized understanding of just how quickly something can be shared online and why it's important to be careful with what you put out there. Another way we might go about emphasizing the unrealistic expectations out there in the digital world is to have students discuss the idea of a video game character. Now, a great way to begin this sort of lesson would be to actually have students to do a bit of a get to know you icebreaker. Tell, you're walking around the room, you need to tell your fellow students 2 things about yourself, and you need to get to every other student by the end of this 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever you choose to give them. Once they've done that, you get them all straight back down the ground, and then you ask them to put up their hand if they said something positive about themselves, which you will get essentially everyone, for the most part, put their hand up saying, yeah, I said something great about myself, or I said I've got a cool dog, or so on and so forth. That's when we discuss the idea of the first thing that we put out there to other people tends to be our better side. So then you can, and this is for the younger years particularly, you get them to come up with a video game version of themselves. What would they be? What would they be if they were in a video game? What power would they have? What would they be? And we can really talk about how in social media we are actually putting forward the best version of ourselves. So when we see someone represented in advertising or social media, we tend to see the best possible version of someone. We don't see the warts and all side. This activity is aimed more so at a more mature cohort. So this is more around a 7-8 level. And this is not my lesson. You can go to that teaching copyright.org handout, and you will find the lesson itself, but it is a fantastic one, which is around looking at copyright laws and looking at legalities around sharing and using other people's material online. Now, a fair use tale is around a Disney mashup. So it's a Disney mashup that explains what copyright is the whole way through. It's really cool, where a whole lot of different Disney films have been joined together to create a description, about a 2-3 minute video explaining what copyright law is and how that works. And there's a lot of discussions you can have around what fair use is, what copyright actually is, and you can start really getting into the nitty-gritty of mashup culture. And particularly if you want to go in with older years, you can start looking at a lot of musicians. There's a lot of music artists out there that have actually been indicted or under criminal charges at the moment for their mashups, where they've taken a whole lot of other people's music and joined it to make their own songs, which has actually breached the copyright of those original IP holders. So part of the idea of this lesson is to look at that particular Disney mashup and then to research and run a mock trial around the fair use of that material. So actually turning your classroom into a bit of a courtroom for a short while to pull apart whether or not that was a legal use of that material. Really fun lesson. Now, this area is a particular passion of mine. I think this is really important. Verification of online information. One of the great things around the way our technology has evolved in society these days is information is ubiquitously accessible now. We can just get it at the ends of our fingertips so easily. One of the other positives, but also a potential negative of that, is it means everyone now has a voice that is of equal value out in the digital world, which means there's a lot of information out there that is not necessarily accurate. And if you jump on your Facebook feed, I guarantee you'll see someone sharing something that is not true. Take The Onion, for example, satirical news site that is designed to put out fake news and get as many likes as it can. So one activity that works particularly well with students is this website that was created by a teacher called the Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus. And it's a website that's designed to lend authenticity to this idea of this fictional endangered species, the Northwest Tree Octopus, with just enough inconsistencies and just, it's quite obviously fake, but it's enough for them to believe it. So the way to conduct this lesson is to basically get them to do a research project on the Northwest Tree Octopus and let them come to their own conclusions as you move through it. They'll start to go, wait a minute, there's something not right there, or that photo's not okay, what's happening here? Once they've started to really develop some uncertainty around what's going on, you can bring them back down and start discussing what you can use to verify information. You can talk about data triangulation and having 3 different sources for your information. You can talk about what is a proper authority figure. Who can we trust? Do they have a title? What do we look for to look for consistencies in information we find online? The goal of an activity like this is to make is to help support students in becoming critical readers, to make them not trust every single thing they see online, but to look at it and really question it. So, before we move into respectful online behaviour, I just want to flick back to that Padlet and see whether we've had some ideas appear. So, code.org I'm seeing up right now, which is a fantastic resource if you haven't gone there before. I haven't actually encountered digizen.org, but sounds very interesting. Compare and contrast of a hard copy photograph, old photograph with a digital photograph. How would that photograph be shared, disseminated? Depending on the photo. I really like that. Some really interesting ideas here. So this is also, Think You Know is also a great resource too. And I love this, Digital Technologies Hub. Awesome, awesome place to go. We're going to leave this open too, so keep adding to it and feel free to take resources from each other. This is the idea of digital citizenship, to support each other and work together. So with respectful online behaviour, just flicking back over to the slideshow here, we can break it down to essentially the understanding of stereotypes, online etiquette, cyberbullying, and relationships. Because all four of these areas play a really heavy part to digital citizenship and respectful behaviour. Once again, we've got a different Padlet here. I'm not going to flip back over it, but feel free to jump onto that one. There'll be another link in your handout, and start adding some ideas around how you've taught or engaged with respectful online behaviour. Most people, I would imagine, will have done some work around cyberbullying at some point or another with their students. It's a really valuable space to work in and essential for this day and age. So right off the bat, one really important thing to do with students, and I think this is across all levels, is an ICT agreement. Now, almost all of our schools will have an ICT agreement. It's essential for them to actually use the technology in our schools. But very rarely do we actually unpack it with the students and get them to put that in their own language and to pull it apart and collaboratively come up with a set of protocols and rules for using technology that they will agree to. Because quite often when you get students to do this themselves, they will actually come up with more rules and more responsibilities that they should be adhering to than they necessarily had in the agreement in the first place. For example, they will talk about the safety of using the device, whether or not they should eat around it, whether they can carry it while using it, whether they are storing it properly. They'll also talk about what sort of websites they should go on. They'll also talk about whether or not they should be on games when the teacher's teaching. So there's a lot of benefits to really pulling that apart and breaking it up into categories. Now, one way I've gone about doing this in the past, which has worked quite well, is an affinity map. Now, if you haven't engaged with an affinity map before, the way it works is you get a whole lot of sticky notes and you give them to students. You put students in groups at their tables and you put down a lot of sticky notes for them. And you give them some time first. All right, we're going to look at safety, ICT safety. So we're going to look at how to look after our equipment, how to engage in an online space safely, and how do we be respectful online, so on and so forth. Put down as many ideas of things that you need to do as you can. One per sticky note. So get them to madly write down every little thing that they could do on their sticky notes and put them all out on their table. And then the idea of an affinity map is for them to start clustering them. So to start looking for commonalities and themes and start putting them in small groups. Once you've given students time to do this at their own tables, you then bring them all back together in their groups and do it on the board up the front, where you get them one person from each group at a time gets to put up an idea. You can't repeat the idea, and you start making these themes or clusters on the board that can then inform their own writing of an ICT agreement. So text messages and context. So this is something around perspective, and I think this is quite an interesting lesson because we've all had that moment in our lives where we've received a text message or a Facebook message or any kind of communication that's written, and we haven't been sure how to take it. We haven't known whether or not it was sarcastic, angry, condescending, happy. Tone is not conveyed well in the written word, particularly in text form and the way that we spend a lot of time communicating these days. And it's important for students to actually understand that and to consciously think about the fact that things can be misinterpreted when you read them. So one way I've gone about doing this is to provide students with a series of conversations, say 4 or 5 different conversations that are the same, but then end at the same point. And then with each of those conversations, I provided a different context. So something along the lines of, message from mum, did you take the bins out last night? No. Why didn't you? I told you to. Something like that. And then the context is 4 different things. You haven't been home for 4 days. You took the bin out, but you forgot, or you forgot about it, but you intended to, so on and so forth. The idea being that the context determines whether or not that message is actually a happy message, a angry message, a sad message, or a sarcastic message. And the students then need to finish that conversation. It's a really good way to get them to start thinking about that. Understanding stereotypes. Now, stereotyping is a really important part of digital citizenship because it underlies a lot of the cyberbullying we do or experience, and underlines a lot of the problems that can come out with social media, because stereotyping is something that we all do to some extent or another, and it's really important we're aware of the stereotypes that we are using and why we feel the way we do. So one activity that I've found really useful here is to provide students with a whole lot of different photos, put up just around the room, photos of different people looking differently from different workspaces. So someone in a suit, someone in a hard hat, someone with a mohawk, so on and so forth, but people who are intentionally going to break some of their stereotypes. The example on the page there is the Mayor of Geelong. So as you could imagine, most of the student responses are along the lines of, oh, he's a rock star, or he's this, or he's that. But they're always surprised when they find out he's actually a mayor. And I think it's really important to discuss that concept that just your physical appearance doesn't equate anything really about your personality apart from the way you choose to present yourself to the world. And it's important for students to think about what their first reaction to those people were. There's another fantastic photo that I've used of one of the world's most rich men out there. He has a particular penchant for dressing in a way that looks very homeless. And so they straight away assumed that he was a poor man or homeless, and turns out he's actually one of the richest people in the world. And this is important because, as I was saying before, a lot of the way we interact in social media is through visual image. We put up photos of ourselves that present ourselves in a very specific way. A further version of this activity that works quite well as well is to put a profession or a type of person, have cards with it written down on them, and stick it to each student's back just with a bit of masking tape. I'm a soldier, have it stuck on my back. Then have them mill around and interact, and they have to treat each other the way that particular profession would, the character that would be associated with that profession, and they have to guess who they are. And it's a really interesting activity for them to then think about why they were able to accurately guess that they were a soldier or they were a homeless person from the way that other people were treating them, and whether or not that's a good thing that we treat people differently based on what we perceive. So a personal web page or a digital portfolio. A lot of schools keep portfolios of students' work, and a lot of schools also keep digital portfolios of students' work. Portfolios are a way of recording student learning, and it's a really great way for students to track their own progress as well. So any tests that you have, getting them to actually record where they were and track their progress throughout, having them put up any work that they're proud of, work in process, so on and so forth. Now, there's a couple of links down the bottom there. Global 2 is the department web design program, but Weebly and Wix are also both great options to use with students. I do recommend using Global 2, but it's a little bit more difficult to navigate. One way that's a really great activity to use with students once they've developed a web page or a digital portfolio is to get them to put up their work as they're going. So if they're creating a story, for example, they're writing a narrative piece, to take a photo of it with phone or an iPad or something, upload it in process, so as it's going, and then put aside quarantine 10-15 minutes every couple of days for them to go onto one other person's website and then comment on that piece of work as it's going constructively. and really discuss that idea of constructive criticism and supporting each other so that they collaborate to create better work. A really good activity to use with them prior to discussing constructive criticism is Austin's butterfly. If you haven't seen that before, you can just throw that into Google, Austin's butterfly. It's a rather old video, but it discusses how to give constructive criticism, and it discusses how to do that in a positive way and the effect that can have on a final piece of work. Now, another activity that you can do is Padlet project management. Now, you've now seen Padlet if you hadn't before, and it's quite an easy tool to use. Now, there's a range of different ways you can interact with this with the students. One is to actually have give students a research project or a project in general and explain to them that the only way that they're allowed to interact is via this digital online medium of Padlet. They're only allowed to communicate using the Padlet. So you split all the kids up and you get a group of 4, for example. You have groups of 4, and then you go, okay, you're one group. You're now going over to that corner of the room, you're going to that corner, you're going to that corner, you're going to that corner. And you are only allowed to communicate with your group members via the Padlet, and you still need to achieve the goals of the task. And very quickly, they will start to get frustrated with each other because they'll start piping over each other, or you bring everyone back in and discuss what they might need to do to make this work, what kind of protocols, how can they communicate in an effective way to make this actually a positive outcome. Another activity using Padlet that works quite well is the idea of a jigsaw. So if you haven't done a jigsaw activity before, it's where you get groups around a topic or an article or an activity. So you have 4 groups of 4, say, for example, again, and you're getting them to look at a news article. They read it through together, they answer a whole bunch of questions, they really break it apart in their little group, and then you split up that group, one person to each other group, and then that person has to share that information back to their new group. So they become every member of the group becomes responsible for sharing all the information that they've come up with together to the others. So a way to do that, similar, get them in that group initially and then have them share through a Padlet to other groups. So you'd have to have a number of Padlets going, but it's a really great way to do it. It's also important to remember too, you can set the Padlet up to not be anonymous if you want to. So you can set it up so students, if they have emails or if they have student IDs, can be identified in that Padlet if you're worried about them being inappropriate with it. So now we're on to digital safety. So actually, before I go into that, I'm just going to flip back to the Padlet and see whether we've had much. Yes.
I'm just going to say there for the second Padlet you put up, it was we weren't able to put some notes down. So maybe did a few people put them down or not?
Okay. I'll have a look at that later then. We won't worry about that.
Maybe the next one, like you did the first one, open it up and just so we definitely can put our ID to it.
That was the poll everywhere though, so I'm not sure why that won't be working. We'll come back to that in a minute. So digital safety is really around privacy and security, password security, internet safety, screen time, and scam awareness. So this is really around looking after ourselves. So while digital footprints around that permanency of data and respectful online behaviors around that, how we interact with others, this part of it is how we look after ourselves and make sure that we're interacting in a safe way. So one way that we can go about this is looking at complex passwords right off the bat, actually looking at what makes a effective password and how computers actually break apart passwords. Now, interestingly, some of the easiest passwords are actually some of the complex and hardest to break, because big brown lizard dog ate my car is actually a really secure password. There's a lot of characters. There's 32 characters in that, because it also counts spaces as a unique character. So and that's not counting the difference between capitals and lowercase or the special characters. So if a computer were to brute force that password, and what brute force means is to literally go through changing each letter one at a time until you get the right password, it would have to go through an insanely long number of combinations. CY3X exclamation mark at, on the other hand, is a relatively short password, only 6 characters long. So it would actually be relatively fast for a computer to brute force, even though it looks far more complex. It is also a much harder password for us to remember off the top of our head. Ironically, most of us have passwords like this second one that are much harder for us to remember, because we think if it's harder for us to remember, it's going to be a safer password. The interesting thing is that there's 2 main ways that computers break passwords, which one is, or people break passwords. One is knowing information about someone and actually guessing it using information about them, such as their birth date, the name of their dog, so on and so forth, or by brute forcing it. So as long as the password doesn't have anything to do with any of your personal information, then the only way to really get through it is to brute force it. So, and when we're looking at these complex passwords that have characters and numbers and exclamation marks in them, we tend to actually use parts of our own name or our birth date or our address, things like that, because they're so hard for us to remember, so we go to familiar things. So an activity to emphasize this to students that is, you can get a big grid that has the alphabet the whole way down with some special characters on the end, and explain that you're going to play a game. Give them each, put them in pairs, give them each a stopwatch. Get them to write down a random word on the back of a piece of paper, and then explain all you have to do is you run your finger along, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, da, 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 and when you get to the letter that is the first letter of their word, they have to tell you to stop. And then the second letter, so on and so forth. And the goal is to be the fastest one to figure out the other person's word. Play it through a few times and they'll start to realize that making longer words or having multiple words takes a lot longer to break. That starts to emphasize that idea of password strength against brute forcing. Another great way to emphasize that point about the memory is simply Chinese whispers. Give them passwords like the ones I just had above and see what comes out at the other end. And they will find that the stuff like big brown lizard dog ate my car will almost universally be correct when it comes through, 6, 7, 8, 10 kids. CY3X exclamation mark at, on the other hand, will be muddled up a bit. Once you've engaged with these ideas of different passwords, you can actually go to websites such as How Secure Is My Password, which I'm just going to show you for a second. It's a simple thing like this. And if I type in for a minute, big brown dog ate my car, exclamation mark, we will see that at the moment it's going to take 2 nonillion years for a computer to crack it. Now, the accuracy of that is questionable, but it emphasizes a pretty simple point. Whereas on the other hand, if I go CYX exclamation mark at 34 milliseconds, really powerful way for students to start thinking about password protection and password strength, which is an important thing in this day and age. Let's go phishing is another activity that I would look at, because scam awareness, scam awareness is actually a really important part of today's society as well. Phishing is a term where someone will send you an email that is phishing for your information in some way or another. We probably are all the most familiar with the Nigerian Nigerian king or Nigerian prince scam, where you receive an email saying that you are somehow related to this Nigerian prince who's recently died, and you're being discovered by their legal company and you're set to inherit multi-million-dollar empire. All they need is your bank details. Surprisingly, a lot of people actually fall for that one. And there's a lot of different types of scams out there around phishing and looking for your information. So one activity you can do to engage with students around this, and it's really important for them to start becoming familiar with this, because a lot of them will have Xbox accounts, they'll have Steam accounts, they will be in the gaming world where they have some account of some form or another. And a lot of these phishing emails and messages will actually go to students. And they'll be phrased in a way that's, oh, your Steam account's been hacked. Put in your secret code and password to make sure you don't lose access, so on and so forth. And it's very easy for them to panic and actually give away really important information that leads to credit card details and so on and so forth. So one way to do this is to go to a website like the one below there and get a whole lot of the examples of phishing emails and correspondence that are out there. There's entire websites dedicated to putting out what you can expect to see. Print off a whole lot of those alongside legitimate correspondence and scatter them around the room and explain this to the students that they need to ascertain which ones are legitimate and which ones are fake, and they need to give reasons why. Get them to do it in a T-chart. What are my reasons for this one being fake? What are the ones, why is this one particularly correct? What's the positive things about it? Why do I think it could be legitimate? Oh, it's from Apple, it's a reputable source, but they've got poor grammar and punctuation, which official correspondence wouldn't, so on and so forth. This is also really interesting to then tie into persuasive writing, because essentially phishing at its essence is persuasive writing. It's trying to convince you to do something. It's trying to convince you to give up some information or persuade you in one way or another. And even just breaking apart some of the techniques used in these phishing emails or correspondence is a great literacy lesson at the same time. This is a lesson that's aimed primarily at younger students. It's just a simple what is safe to share. And a really great way to go about this is simply an icebreaker with the students. Get them to go around. You need to share everything you possibly can with everyone around you. You need to mill up. I want you to know as many things about the person next to you as you can. This helps encourage them to brainstorm as many bits of personal information as they can to share, because they're sharing it with each other. They're learning about each other. Then we discuss the idea of, okay, but what if this was an online space? What if this wasn't in our classroom? What if this was over an email or a phone call or a social media of some description, or the Xbox? What is safe? What is unsafe? Okay, your favorite food, your opinion, your first name, they're okay. But what about your address or your phone number? And this is where you can also start to bring in that idea of the rule of three, if you've ever encountered that before. In online space, you can't have a photo of yourself, your name, and your address, or you can't have so on and so forth. You can only have less than 3 pieces of information that can identify you. Who would you hire for a day, a manager for a day? So this is an activity aimed a little bit more middle years to senior. Senior works quite well, particularly if you've got students that are starting to look at work experience, so on and so forth. The idea is to actually say, pick a job. You are now the manager. You are now in charge of that job. You are the person who is responsible for hiring your staff. And you need to get the most productivity as you can out of your staff. Provide them with a series of fake Facebook or social media accounts and explain to them that it is now common recruiting practice for most companies out there to look at your Facebook and social media. In fact, it's acceptable for many companies to actually have that in their hiring policy as part of their code of conduct. So explain to them, this is part of your job. You are looking at their resumes and you are looking at their Facebook accounts, and you're going to see who you're going to hire. And then get them to make decisions. So have 15 fake social media profiles, for example, and then say you've got to hire 3 people out of this. Which 3 and why? And really discuss what it is that's in those social media profiles and on their walls or in their photos that encourages you to hire one way or the other, and then get them to think about that in relation to their own lives and whether they maybe already have things out there that are not appropriate for a workplace. For example, there are a great deal of year 4s, year 5s that are on Instagram. It's actually their more go-to instead of Facebook at the moment. And that's concerning. Apart from the legal ramifications of them not being old enough to be on it, it's concerning in terms of what they're already putting out there that prospective employers are then going to see and the impact that that could have on their lives later on. Class blog. If you haven't run a class blog before with your grade, it's a really great way to share the learning that's happening in your grade, to bring in parents because they can view it at home and actually have that community engagement of what's happening. Having a weekly news update of one thing going on in class, or in science this week we did X, Y, Z with photos. It's a really great way for students to take a bit of ownership over their own learning and really share some pride in it. But as part of this process, they really need to come up with a page outlining what is permissible to share online and what is not. What is appropriate to be in that space? What is safe to be in that space? If we're going to put photos up of kids in this space, can we also put what school they've gone to? Can we put their names? This is where we discuss those ideas of the rules of three. And this is where we discuss cyber safety in depth, because they are engaging in a public space. It's not a closed down space. We're having a blog that parents and other adults can access, and that has risks. So now we're going to move on to some of the resources that are accessible to you and some other places that you can find further support and further learning, really, to support you in the classroom. Now, obviously, the Digital Technologies Hub, in my opinion, is the first place to go. It's a fantastic resource. You already know that, you're here. But one place to look here is there's the digital citizenship area of the hub, which actually really breaks down some of these ideas and the key terms. But in terms of searching for resources within the hub, we've put together some keywords or key terms that you can put in to help support you in finding resources. Now, you can also use that in Google to further find other resources. So digital citizenship, digital footprint, cyber security, online safety, password, digital identity, cyberbullying, cryptography, and online communication, just to help guide you in finding further resources. But some other places that we recommend looking as well, once you've already had a bit of a look through all the stuff on the hub, is the Office of the Safety Commissioner. So this is the government website. It's got a lot of great standalone lessons for primary schools and a lot of great resources here. Mozilla also has some really well put together resources around cyber safety and password protection, so on and so forth. The DQ Institute is a great place to look at digital citizenship as a whole and get a better understanding of what's embedded in that. Common Sense Education, once again, really good resources to support you there. The Digital Education Revolution has some, this is more interactive, these are some more resources that will support students themselves, same as Game On down the bottom there. Project Rocket, if you haven't encountered them before, they're amazing. They do a lot of work around cyberbullying and interacting. They're mostly aimed at young adult, teenagers. Really, really good resources, and code.org is a fantastic place to find further lessons and further support across all the digital technologies curriculum. As I said, though, I highly recommend the Digital Technologies Hub first. So we're getting close to the wrap-up time, so I just want to talk a bit about the learning intentions for this webinar were to become more familiar with digital citizenship within the Australian curriculum, to look at some practical and engaging ways to teach digital citizenship in the classroom, and to know what relevant keywords were to use to refine your search on the Digital Technologies Hub and to locate relevant resources. Now, just before I do wrap up completely, I'd like to flip back over to that original Wordle and just see how it's populated, just so we can all see just how what's come out there from everyone's perspective around digital citizenship. And as we can see, digital safety right up there front, and positive behaviour and online responsibility. Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a fantastic graphic there, and as I said, great tool to use both as a pre and post formative assessment with your students to get their prior knowledge. And then also at the end, you can just one word each, throw it in. What's the main theme we got out of this? And it's a really good way to just quickly judge whether or not they're getting an understanding of what you're looking at. So I'd like to thank you for your time. I hope it's been valuable. There's a link in the chat in terms of a poll around how you found this. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions or if you'd like direction in any way. And as I said, thank you very much for coming along. Martin, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, going back to your slide, what you've covered, so I think you've got a tick on all three of those intentions. We've definitely got we're more familiar with the digital technologies aspect of the curriculum with the digital citizenship, and also those practical ideas. I was just really engaged in the way you were describing those activities and bring them to life. So just to make mention, the handout has got a lot of those activities that that Matt went through. So you've got your links to those activities there. Just check the Digital Technologies Hub. It'll show you where the basic year levels that you're looking at. And Matt's doing some more writing for us. So Matt, I'm sure you'll get some more resources up on the hub for us. And yeah, I just thought that was a brilliant webinar, and you know the way you took us through it was really engaging. And I'm sure people will have a little go at that Padlet and just trying to use that as a tool as well. So I really appreciate all the time and effort you went into developing that webinar for us and presenting it in such a great way. And we'll be in touch soon. And there is a little short survey at the end of the webinar if you can fill that in. If you've got any more ideas about topics you want to see, let us know and we'll endeavour to get those topics out to you. But thanks again for participating, and thanks, Matt, once again. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Actually, the next webinar we know is on girls in tech. So if you're interested in strategies to help your students engage in digital technologies, we've got a whole lot of practical ideas to do that. So that'll be in about a month's time. All right. Thanks a lot. See you later.